Welcome to today's episode of the AWS Migration Modernization Podcast. In this episode, we're going to talk about why and how to decouple your migration from your modernization. I'm Matthias Patzak. I'm an executive in residence with AWS. And today with me is Jake Burns, also an executive in residence with AWS. Jake, why do you recommend to customers to decouple their migration efforts from their modernization efforts?
Yeah, it's a great question. So for me, the key to a successful migration is to do it quickly and to do it successfully. Sounds obvious, but to simplify a migration, you focus on the migration itself. So what happens is when anything that's not migration related gets put into the migration project, it adds additional complexity to the migration itself. And that tends to slow things down. It tends to cause additional risk in terms of financial costs, in terms of migrations not being successful. And so in my mind and what I've observed and through my own personal experience, doing a very rapid migration, focusing on the migration itself and taking everything else out of it, including the modernization, as tempting as it is to do in that phase, actually makes the migration more successful and actually gets you to the modernization much more quickly. And in my opinion, the modernization is what it's all about. We want to get to the cloud as quickly as possible so that we can modernize using cloud tools. So that's, in simple terms, why I think decoupling the two efforts makes both more successful.
But isn't doing a migration quickly risky? So it sounds like, okay, we're not really planning, we are not really upscaling the people, we just lift and shift in the cloud. And then what are the benefits from just lifting and shifting?
Yes. So great question. So first of all, I would say that going slowly is far more risky in my experience working with customers than going too quickly. I've yet to meet a customer that's gone too quickly, and that introduced risk. So while I think it is certainly hypothetically possible to go so fast that it would be too risky, the more common scenario is that going too slow is introducing risk. And the ways that going too slow introduces risk is that, a lot of times these migrations, you have different cohorts of people within the organization in terms of attitude towards cloud and attitude towards migration. And so you have the really eager early adopters, and you have kind of the resistors who, don't want to do it. Then you have a lot of folks in the middle. You really want to win over those folks in the middle. And so, going slowly gives those folks in the middle and the resistors time to kind of doubt, whether this thing is going to be successful or valuable and so forth. And so going slowly risks the entire migration actually perhaps not even going forward because people decide they don't want to do it anymore. And winning the hearts and minds in any transformation, including a cloud transformation, cloud migration, is really key to whole success. So that's one reason. Another reason is cloud migration costs money. I think it doesn't have to cost very much money, but the longer you draw it out, typically the more expensive it's going to be. Right? Because a project that takes longer generally is going to be more expensive. You're paying for consultants longer, you're paying for resources, you might be double paying for servers on-prem and in the cloud longer and so forth. And so if it's more expensive, then there's more risk of, the CFO being unhappy and cost overruns. So that would be the first thing I'd say about that. Second thing I would say is that you certainly want to upskill your people. You don't want to skip that part. There are certain things that I advocate slowing down for, but the net result is to go very fast. So you go a little bit slow in the beginning by taking the time to upskill. And before you upskill, you actually want to make sure their attitude is positive, so getting buy-in from them. But get them upskilled and then start winning with applications by migrating very simple ones and getting the momentum going in your favor. So I would argue that for those reasons and a lot of other reasons, going fast is, in practice, far less risky.
Yeah, I wonder if going fast resonates with every kind of customers. What I like also is a term I use a lot when I talk with customers, and you were the person who coined this term is, you said in one of your talks, don't start when you're ready, but become ready by starting. And this is what I really like a lot. And this is what I see what a lot of customers also like a lot. And this is how, and we both did as former customer executives, migration modernizations, observed when we migrated, that it really helps when your people get hands on the cloud. And this is what I liked with AWS in the early days. It was really about getting the people, the customers, my developers, my engineers, as fast on the console as possible. And this is what I'm missing a lot in current discussions. So the primary measure of progress is how many lines in an Excel sheet we have already filled out. And every line in this Excel sheet is a single application, a single workload. And sometimes I see Excel sheets with 8,000 lines, and then it's maybe up to, and this is the most complex example I've seen, 100, up to 100 different criteria to evaluate the workload and then decide in a super complex matrix when and why to migrate or modernize a certain application. And this is really horrible because I see customers 1 or 2 years planning the migration.
Yes.
And spending a lot of effort.
Right.
And from my perspective, and this is your message as well, unnecessary effort. And from my perspective, the primary measure of progress of a migration, and this is inspired by the Agile Manifesto, is working or migrated application.
Yep. That's it. So we want to optimize for that. And number of my applications migrated is a great metric. I think a slight twist on that, which I used, is number of applications decommissioned from the data center.
Oh.
Because often what happens is in the process of migrating, you decide, we don't even need this application anymore. And if we think about what the goal is, oftentimes it's a data center exit. That was my case. And so that's what I really cared about it. And also, one of the great things about being in the cloud is the amount of observability you have. You really know what assets you have, right? Because it's right there in front of you. This is something in IT we never really had before. There was always a question as to how many servers we had, how many applications we had. And you'd have 7 different sources of truth, and none of them were agreeing with each other. And so you don't really know. It's funny, like when you're counting how many migrations, you can't really count down. That count gets changes, the number kind of changes until you get to 0 in the data center, assuming it's a full all-in migration like it was in my case. So yes, focusing on the goal is super important. And what you said about that planning, this is another reason why going fast is so important. It's because so often the pattern has become these endless planning cycles.
Yeah.
And I think it stems from this desire to have a perfect plan. And the reality is you're never going to have a perfect plan. Your highest chance of having a perfect plan is actually by just going and trying and doing it. Now, the pushback on that is, we don't have a great plan yet. That's going to be risky. So the key is to first make sure that you reduce the cost of failure. And there's several ways you can do that. And then just go do it. Make it what at Amazon we call a two-way door decision, something where if you don't like the result, you can back out very easily. So an example of that would be early in the migration, just migrating, maybe even pretend servers, like make a new VM in your environment and then migrate that into a sandbox environment. That'd be the safest. Then maybe just really non-business critical simple machines, right? That if something goes wrong, it's not a big deal and it's very easy to do. And in the process of doing that, your organization is going to find out not only general best practices on how to migrate to cloud, the real way to do it, what the truth is, the most optimal way to do it, but the most optimal way to do it for you, for your organization, because there is a little variation between how organizations want to do it. So I couldn't agree more with that sentiment. Learn by doing. And at some point, you just have to say the plan is good enough and we need to get started. And then you discover the perfect plan by doing the process. And in fact, the plan only becomes perfect at the very end.
And actually, it's the initial plan.
Right.
It's the initial plan. And you need to iterate on your cloud migration, and you have to learn how cloud really works, what are the benefits, what are the challenges. And this is why you need to get as fast and quickly as possible workloads in the cloud. But how quick is quickly? So how long does such a accelerated migration takes?
So when I was migrating, we did all of the North American IT infrastructure, and these were some of them. My team would call them works of art. So we had two different ERP systems, one of which was absolutely not supported in the cloud at the time, but we made it work, and we did it in 17 months. So I had a 12-month deadline, and it took us 17 months.
Including the ERPs?
Yes. Actually, the the extra months were that one last ERP system, and it wasn't a technical issue. It was just convincing the organization to be okay with feeling comfortable with moving it, given the vendor's stance on at the time of moving it to AWS. Of course, it all worked well. It's a very good success story. But if I was to go back and do it over again, I think we could, especially with today's tools, I would aim for 2-3 months probably.
Wow.
The limiting factor is really just getting your team upskilled and bought in, because once you get alignment within an organization, the folks that are going to be doing the migration, the folks that are stakeholders, once the organization is aligned, it's amazing how quickly you can move. Most of the slowness and even manifesting as these endless planning cycles, which are oftentimes just fear-based procrastination, if we're being honest. A lot of that just comes to not everyone's aligned on why we're doing this, and they're not in agreement with doing it. And so getting that alignment, if you could do that, front load that, and be okay with doing that first, then the rest becomes really the only limiting factor that I see is data transfer. And we have such great tools to do that. The Snow family of services, we have data migration services that are very good at moving data, so much more advanced than what I had 10 years ago. So that limiting factor is really not that much of a limiting factor either, unless you have just an extraordinary amount of data.
But the 2 up to 3 months is after the workforce was reskilled and upskilled, or is it including this? Because what I see with customers, it takes 2 or 3 months to even plan the reskilling and upskilling. Then they upskill all developers and admins at once in a training program, and then they set up the future organization, Cloud Center of Excellence, a platform. So they have to plan the platform engineering team, and then 12 months are gone, and then they start migrating the first workloads. So
yes. So I would say best case scenario. So if I was doing it over again and had alignment, yes, I would include that in the training. And the reason I say that is because, this 12-month deadline that I had and a lot of other constraints that I had, budget constraints and other things, was a forcing function for me to figure out a way to do it in a most efficient way possible. And one of those things was to do the training and the migration at the same time. So now this is a lot to ask of your team, but if you can get buy-in and alignment from them, so if they can really understand, really want to do this, be enthusiastic about the cloud, see it as something that's good for them, a good career path for them, career growth for them, and as something that's fun and enjoyable, which I believe a cloud migration should be, and it was certainly for the case, in my case, then you don't really have to really ask them to put in those long hours. So at one point we were doing training in the morning, migrations in the afternoon on top of our day job, right?
as part of the training. So
Yes. Now, it's really interesting. What I discovered by accident, now I would have never done this on purpose, was that doing the training at the same time of doing the migration made that training stick like no IT training I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Because you can imagine, we're in training, and I was in there with them. So another thing I recommend is leadership. Go in the training with your team. Don't expect to become certified solutions architects necessarily, but if you can, that's great. But it's a good team building, exercise and great for morale, and helps you get cloud fluent, which is super important if you're going to manage it. But the really interesting thing is you learn something, and then that very day you get to put it into practice. And then you come in the next day to training, and then it's not hypothetical anymore. We were at some point where it became a joke, because they would put we're going to do this simulated exercise, and somebody would just raise their hand and say, can we talk about what we tried yesterday? And so the training becomes super relevant, because they know they have to learn this material to do their job. They're encountering things that they're learning kind of in real time. And so if you can pull off doing the training while you're doing the migration, or at least have some overlap, it's super powerful.
And you just probably train what is needed for the minimal migration you're recommending. But actually, the cloud adoption approach that you recommend is not we do a migration and then modernize, but actually it's one initiative, but with two phases, migrate very fast so that you can then modernize. This is the whole intent of decoupling.
Yes, absolutely. So the entire process kind of looks like this. You're going to do very minimal planning. And so it's kind of iterative planning. So you kind of get like a good enough plan, which is basically your application portfolio as best you can, and sequence it from kind of easiest to hardest, least business critical to most business critical, right? And start with kind of the easy, least business critical ones, because you want to win in the beginning. You want it to be easy to win in the beginning, and you want to build confidence, and you want to build momentum. And confidence not only within the team that's doing it, but of the organization that you can do it as a leader and that your team can do it. And so you need to build a series of wins to get that momentum. So sequence it that way. That should take a very short amount of time. Build a minimal viable landing zone, so something that is enough to get started, has all the security built in that you need, but realize that that's going to evolve over time as well. So don't spend don't spend months or even years on building a landing zone. Same with CCOE. Keep that very kind of minimal in the beginning, because over time you're going to learn what you need, and it's going to be a lot easier to build as you grow into the cloud. And then just get started migrating with those things. Now the key is there's going to be a lift and shift. I think really doesn't truly exist. There's always going to be some changes you have to make. So when I say refactoring, I'm referring to optimization, which is like right sizing and things like that. Actual refactoring, like code refactoring, and some modernization things, like, there's certain things you have on-prem that just don't exist in the cloud, and you have to kind of modernize that. So like maybe going from whatever your storage vendor is to elastic block storage.
But just to make the application work on the cloud.
Exactly. You do the minimum number of changes, minimal viable refactoring, for that migration portion, because you don't want anything to get worse. So it's kind of a Hippocratic oath of IT, first do no harm. So for, say, security compliance, performance, resiliency, reliability, and cost, make sure that you do just the minimum number of changes, that none of those become worse in the cloud, but stop short, because you don't want to do a full modernization in flight, because that slows everything down.
Yeah.
But here's the key. So it's not quite a lift and ship, it's a minimal viable refactor. As soon as that application goes live in the cloud, you begin modernizing. So you don't have to wait until the entire migration is finished.
But how do you handle the capacity of your team? Because you have 1,000 applications. You start with the easy ones, probably VMware, and then the Windows servers, and then the ERP system, and then maybe your monoliths, microservice applications. But you have already migrated the first 100, then you start to modernize them, maybe exchange the database, but you already have to migrate 900.
Yes.
So isn't this really a stretch for the organization?
Absolutely. So all of this is going to depend on your resources and how many people you have and how fast they can work and how effective they are, right? So there's going to be a range. You could certainly, so on one end of the spectrum, you can wait until the entire portfolio is migrated. I would recommend no delay after that, start modernizing and use that same team to do it, right? So that would be kind of the slowest approach. If you do have the resources, you can do, like I said, migrate and then start modernizing, and you do it as capacity frees up. So there are areas within a migration project where there's people waiting. Like, I used to design software, so I'm a big fan of asynchronous processes and non-blocking processes. So I kind of think of a migration as an optimal migration is one that's asynchronous and non-blocking. So that what that means is there's never somebody just sitting there waiting and doing nothing. Now, in many stages of the migration process, there are going to be opportunities for that blocking to happen. So common areas are waiting for approvals from stakeholders, or waiting for data to transfer, or things like that. So you can use those times when you're blocked to either start another migration or to start modernizing one of the applications. And this will be depending on the priority of your organization. So sometimes you have a data center exit that you just need to get out as quickly as possible. In that case, I would probably say just fill those slots with more migrations. But in other cases, you're really trying to get value out of some of these applications as soon as possible. In that case, I would probably say start modernizing that to get that value. And so it's a flexible framework that really can adapt to whatever the priorities of the organization is.
So I can see the beauty in your approach, which is you said you should start with the easiest one and then work your way through the application portfolio into the hardest ones. And at the beginning, you actually would not modernize or wouldn't do any refactoring at all because it's not necessary. You just lift and shift a Windows server. But then later, you have to modernize, refactor a bit more. And then with the hardest application, you have already a lot of experience in modernizing the hardest applications. So I can see the beauty. General, when I talk to customers about migration and how to prioritize the application portfolio, I give a different recommendation. I would be interested in your point of view because my recommendation is start with easy applications to bootstrap, gets your hands dirty, get some experience, get some successes. But then my recommendation is choose the hardest ones. So the one with the highest technical risk and the highest business value. Because what I've seen is that after probably 2 years, and this is why this dimension of time is so relevant in your approach, usually the CEO or the CFO kills the cloud migration because they say, hey, where's the benefit? Right. This is, my recommendation is you need to touch some of the really important applications, and you need to put them in the cloud in a way so that you really benefit from the cloud adoption, which is agility, higher innovation, more secure, higher availability, more productivity. You get better talent, whatever it is. But you recommend something different. So what's your thinking about my approach, and why do you recommend it differently?
Yeah, and I'll be clear that I don't think your approach is necessarily wrong.
Yeah.
I think for the majority of the customers, the default of starting with the easiest ones and going through. And it really does also depend on what your goals are. So in my experience, if a CFO is, needs to be pleased by this, say if a CFO is skeptical of the migration, or CFO has a goal, let's just say, that needs to be achieved by this. In my experience, and I don't necessarily like this, but what I see is typically the first thing that he or she wants is cost savings.
True.
Right? I think the real benefit of cloud goes far beyond cost savings. Yeah. But most of these organizations that are migrating, they don't have the full conceptual understanding of the value that cloud's going to bring them. Which is another reason to just get started, because you're going to find that as you go as well. You don't need to have a perfect business case ahead of time. You will find those values. So for the most common case of cost reduction, exiting a data center can be very, very much attractive to the CFO. And I think that a lot of people believe in, again, I wouldn't say lift and shift, I would say a minimal viable refactor, because there's going to be some refactoring. It's just a minimum amount. Can be done in a way that will be less expensive than running on-prem from an operating, like app-by-app operating cost perspective. Of course, then you get these other savings that happened during milestones, like if you were to get off, a particular virtualization platform, not have to renew that. There would be a huge savings in not renewing that, especially if that cost was going up, which is often the case. You would also get a huge increase in cost if you were able to stop paying for a lease on a data center. So those are things. So those are things that can please the CFO. Now, in the rare cases, and I get excited about these because these are like more forward-thinking companies, where the CFO is more interested in getting value, capabilities out of the cloud, then I would actually agree with your approach of taking that. Once the team is demonstrated competency on the easy things, I would still start with some of those, but I would much earlier front load what you suggested, something that can demonstrate value, because there's already an appetite within the organization to do that.
So this sounds great, but what are you actually observing in the industry, how customers and organizations are trying to tackle migrations?
Yeah. So since I've been spending the last 7 years or so engaging with customers across the various topics having to do with digital transformation, but because of my background, more and more about migration. Now, I'm actually shocked in this day and age that we're still doing migrations. I would have thought that everyone would have been migrated by now. Um, so I've been diving deep on some of these customer scenarios, and I'm seeing kind of very similar pattern over and over again. So these long planning cycles, like you said. Oftentimes, when I talk to a customer and I get involved in their migration that is stalled after maybe 1 or 2 years, I find that it's zero apps migrated, which is concerning. So this idea of having to get a perfect plan, this trying to get started before there's alignment across the organization, and often I find the root cause is that there is a team and technical team within the organization that doesn't see migration. They don't see what's in it for them. That hasn't really been fully communicated to them, and so they'll passively resist because it's kind of looks like a threat to the job security.
And how to handle these teams? So do you try to bring them on the bus, or do you just put them at the side?
No, they have to come along.
Okay.
So and this is another way that you make your migrations less expensive, by the way, and more successful, is you use the team that you have as much as possible. Of course, you use partners, but you use partners to enable your team. And so there's the messaging component, explaining why you're doing what you're doing to the team, why we're doing this migration, how it's going to impact their careers positively. You provide them a training, which kind of backs up that evidence, and then you give them the chance to do the migration. You bring in partners and solutions architects and others to support them in that effort, kind of a reverse shadow type situation. And then they see the investment that's being made in them, and then they become excited about doing it. So that's really the first thing that needs to happen. You need to get the people who are silently not happy about the situation to see all the positives. And the good news is the truth is on our side because it really is a lot of positives. The teams that go through this end up becoming more valuable. They end up having much more interesting jobs and providing more value to the business. So there's more meaning in their work.
But isn't this exactly one of the reasons why in some of our customers' organization, the preparation for migration takes ages? Because they try to convince everyone in our organization that cloud technology and AWS is the right way to go?
Yeah, I think convincing is going to be a hard thing for people who aren't convinced, in my experience. Yeah. So the best thing is to show. So there's typically going to be people within the organization who are excited about it, like different cohorts, right? So you take the people, and they may not be senior level people. You just take the people that are, you index based on enthusiasm and openness. And you give them chances, you give them training, you give them opportunities to do this work, do the migration work, supported by experts that you bring in as a safety net for them. So you show success with them, and then you build upon that. And then there's people who are kind of on the fence that will come on board. So I think convincing is a very difficult thing to do. I also think trying to create a business case for cloud itself is a somewhat difficult thing to do. Although the business case is great, you kind of discover the business case more than you kind of create it. You adopt the technology, and then you find great uses for it. And if you follow best practices, and if you have high standards in terms of keeping costs in control along the way, then you can have reduced cost and the benefits at the same time. So it's not really a trade-off between the two.
So this is another example for become ready by starting. So you would not start when everyone is convinced.
Correct.
But you would convince people by starting.
Yes.
And showing the benefits of clouds. And while starting with the easy application, I'm just thinking out loud, and while starting with the easy application, so progress and success is somehow granted because chances are high that the simple application runs in the cloud without a lot of effort. And so the people in the organization, the late majority, the laggards, can observe from early on how easy it is. And it's getting harder application by application, or?
Yeah, well, it gets harder as your capabilities get more and
As
more.
they grow. Yeah,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah. So it works out very well that way. So as you go through applications that are harder and harder and more critical as well. So the stakes get higher. You have greater capabilities. You have greater experience. You have greater confidence from the people and support from within the organization. You have less resistance typically within the organization. You have momentum generally on your side. And so you want to put yourself in the most advantageous position when you get to the more difficult ones, generally speaking.
Could you give a bit more advice on how to uninstall styled migration?
Yes. So this is something that I've been doing a lot lately to try to just prove that things don't need to be as complicated as they look. Because what I found is that over the years, the complexity level of the migration process that people are following is going up. And this is causing migrations to take longer and become more expensive. And it really should be the other way around because the technology is getting better. And we have more examples of what good looks like, right? So this, to me, is a matter of just making things more complicated than they need to be. And oftentimes this comes from just a lack of first principles understanding of what cloud migration is, and really isn't that difficult to understand. If you think about just a basic migrating workloads to the cloud, we're taking servers and storage, generally speaking, and from one environment and moving it to another. Now, infrastructure people have been doing this forever in the form of data center consolidations, right? Now it becomes even easier because most of these workloads are already virtualized. So now we're talking about taking virtualized workloads off of one virtualization platform onto another, the cloud, AWS EC2 versus on-prem virtualization platform. That's actually a very easy thing to do. You're just copying data, essentially, making some changes, of course, to make it compatible, and there are great tools, free tools available that can do that. And at most basic level, that's what a migration is. So then everything that you put on top of that is really optional. So while a CCOE is generally a good idea, it doesn't have to be a very complex organization or multiple organizations. That is not a requirement. I think it's good to have alignment across different functional areas of your organization. So I'd say information security, finance, the cloud team, and maybe the application owners and development, like having somebody representing all those people getting together and agreeing on governance structure and policies. So it could be that lightweight in the beginning. So you don't necessarily have to follow these very complex organizational structures before you get started. Same with landing zones. Landing zone really is, at least when I was doing it, I didn't even know the concept of landing zone. It was such a non-event for me. You create AWS accounts. You have authentication, which is typically tied to a single sign-on within your organization, and you have VPCs, which is just an abstraction to put your networking, subnets, and access control lists, which is kind of like maybe a cloud-native way of doing firewalls. And at that point, you're pretty much ready to migrate. So that could be a minimal viable landing zone. Now, there are a lot of landing zone components you could put in there, things like a control tower, which are great things to use, and I highly recommend using them. But my point is, you don't have to use every single service and feature before you get started, right? Just put together what's necessary to begin the migrations as quickly as possible. And when you understand what a migration is, it's clear what those things are, and especially if your team is trained, they will know precisely what those things are. And then all of the complexity, you will add in as needed when you need it, but you don't need to do that all up front. So when I look at a typical migration today, what I see is putting in every single possible feature and functionality from the CCOE structure, from the landing zone structure, from the migration plan itself, which can be just as simple as an application portfolio with cutover dates in its most simple form, and just really over-engineering all those things before getting started. What I've been doing is going into these organizations, and typically they're very frustrated because of the lack of progress, and just showing them just how easy it can be by saying, here's how you can create a migration plan. We could do that in a couple hours, typically. Here is the most basic migration tools. which are typically provided for free, that could do the migration of the data for you and the application operating system for you. And then let's go ahead and just try it with some workloads. A recent example of that is a customer that had been, for 4 years, been a customer of ours and hadn't been migrating anything. I spent a day with them. I brought in a partner to help with this, and it was really kind of a reverse shadow type situation. By the end of the day, this team that had really no prior experience using AWS had migrated 15 applications.
In a single day?
In a single day.
After 4 years with migrating nothing?
Yes. So they just needed to be shown how easy it was, right? And the really interesting part was what I heard, like when we were leaving, they didn't want to leave. They wanted to keep working. It becomes addictive. You know, the success it's a great feeling to be able to do something that you've been trying to do for a long time and just finally be able to do it. And so getting organizations unstuck is typically just a matter of just not addressing all of the complexity, but just saying, put that aside for a moment and think about this very simple way that you can do it and just try it. And once they try it, then usually they can get unstuck, and that's the process.
So how to uninstall stalled migration? Just do it.
Yes. So I would maybe expand that a little bit. I would say make sure that everyone's aligned. Make sure that everyone understands what cloud migration is. Make sure that they're bought into this principle of migrate, then modernize, and why. You know, look, modernization is the whole reason to use the cloud. It's the whole reason to migrate. So, but you want to get to that point as quickly as possible. So really understanding the benefits of decoupling those two things so you can get to the modernization more quickly. Once they're bought into that and they see, maybe they're shown just how easy it could be done, then I've had great success working with organizations to do that.
Why to wait until everyone is aligned? In my career, sometimes I just did things, so just do it to show you can do it. Because, as you said, convincing people is hard and you have a lot of arguments. Then you ask your cloud provider in again, could you do a presentation? You ask a partner, you go to a conference. No, but you can just do it. So why is this everyone needs to be aligned important, and how do you do it?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I wouldn't say everyone has to be completely aligned, but everyone needs to understand what we're doing and why we're doing it, right? So it needs to be communicated. And typically you'll get alignment from enough people in order to get started. But the problem is oftentimes these things are done kind of in a non-transparent way, right? People aren't included, people aren't told what's being done. So yeah, that should be a relatively quick process, but it's the process of getting buy-in, just telling people what we're doing, why we're doing it. You have an opportunity to contribute to this if you like, and then getting started, as you say. So it is a bit of a, there's an alignment process, but it's not waiting for 100% alignment, of course. Just get started.
What about budget? Because I know that some of the customers that take ages, it's about because they need to ask for budget. They need to ask for capacity. And this is why they need to plan the order of the applications. They need to understand the complexity so that they can get an offer from a partner, from a supplier. And with your approach, it's hard to come up with numbers, isn't it?
I think that, well, if we're talking about estimating the costs of running in the cloud, I think that is a relatively simple process as well.
Running in the cloud, I would agree, but the migration efforts.
So, yes, that should be pretty much zero cost, I would say.
Unbelievable.
Well, let's talk about that. So let's deconstruct that. If you are using your own employees, now, of course, you could say that there's cost, opportunity cost, right? But there's no, in real dollars, you're already paying their salaries. So I'm not going to claim that that's free, but that's cost effective, right? Yeah. Partners typically can be funded in almost all cases I've seen partners be funded to some degree. Now, there's going to be a limit to that, but I think that there's a limit to how much partner help you need if, the goal of bringing the partner is enabling your own team, right? So their mission should be to be phased out as early as possible.
Yeah.
We're going to come in, we're going to, at the very beginning, probably do some of the migrations while your team watches, and then eventually be handing that process over to them. And they'll be doing it under supervision and then doing it without supervision. So these could be pretty lightweight engagements that can be funded by the cloud provider. I know AWS has many mechanisms to fund these because I see it all the time. So that could be, if not no cost, very low cost. What other costs? So the tools are, at least with AWS, we provide the tools, the migration tools, and there's various ones to choose from. So that's typically low cost or no cost. So, yeah, I think if you do it fast and you do it without adding all the things that are unnecessary, where I see the most cost come from is the planning phase, right? When you have external folks coming in to help do all of these optional things. When I say optional, it's really up to the organization, but if you're going to spend, for example, a year building a landing zone, that's going to cost money.
Yep.
And at the end of that, you're probably not going to have any applications migrated. But if you are able to put together a landing zone in, say, a week, which I think is completely doable, with under guidance, minimal viable landing zone, then that should be very inexpensive. So I think cutting out most of the planning, getting started quickly, and just getting to the other side of the migration as quickly as possible I aim for 0. In my migration, it was 0 because I had 0. Most cases, it's not going to be precisely 0, but you should aim for 0, and it should be very low cost. Certainly lower cost than what is typical.
It looks like in your and in my organization, when we did the migration modernization, we had a very skilled workforce available. But some customer organizations, they have mostly outsourced all of their IT department, and the IT department is actually IT coordination and IT procurement. So they have to ask an external party, hey, could you do the migration for us?
Yes.
And so they need to, and then how would you approach this? Would you say, okay, we do a capacity-based budgeting, so we ask for 10 or 50 cloud engineers, and then you migrate as quickly as possible inside of this capacity and budget envelope? Or would you start, okay, nevertheless, you have to do some estimations, and then again, we are in this planning phase?
I would argue in that case, yeah, it is more complex for sure, right? Because now you have, in this scenario, of an outsourced organization that is managing your on-prem environment. They may or may not be willing and able to do the migration for you. They may not be the right people to do it. At that point, it becomes coordinating between multiple, multiple external entities, right? Because if you're going to have a new migration partner come in, then they're going to have to be able to coordinate with the outsourced staff that's doing. So in my experience, there's a little more complexity in that scenario, but a little more cost as well because you don't have the staff to do the migration itself. So you do need a budget for that. But I would also argue, though, while there will be an increased cost in that scenario, which is inevitable, the faster you do the migration, the lower that cost will be. Because if you think about it, if you're planning for a 24-month migration, let's just say, that's 24 months of cost. But if you can shrink that down to 6 months, then obviously it's going to be a lower cost. And I think that in my experience, those more rapid migrations tend to be more successful as well. They tend to have less delays and so forth. If you do it in this specific way where you build momentum over time, then that's how you're going to minimize your costs. But yeah, certainly the planning will be a little bit more because you need to make sure that the partners can collaborate well. But in that scenario, your full-time staff actually becomes more empowered than they are today as well, because now they are, they're already managing their outsourced team, and they're going to be also managing this other outsourced team that's doing the migration. So they're going to be making a lot of the decisions, hopefully. And again, that's key. When you're dealing with partners, I think that as a customer, it's very important to own the strategy and not outsource the strategy.
some organizations struggle with owning the strategy because they don't have any experience. And this is why the planning phase takes so long. But this is why I like your approach, because the organization is getting experience very soon, very early on with this, easy migration. So we just copied 10 VMware machines from the data center to the cloud.
Yes. Yeah. So again, the planning really just, you can rely on your cloud provider to help with a lot of that guidance as well. Look, put it this way, almost everybody, there are some exceptions, but for almost everybody who is planning a cloud migration, it's their first time doing it.
Yeah.
Right? There are more and more, I'm seeing exceptions to that. But this kind of, I have no experience with this, therefore the planning is difficult. I mean, we've all gone through that. The good thing about doing it today, it's so funny, it's like every time I say this in the last 10 years, it's been true, but there's never been a better time to migrate, because it gets easier because there's just so many more good examples of how to do it. So we're no longer guessing anymore. We know what good looks like. So my best advice to those organizations who maybe are struggling with the planning or thinking that they don't have the experience or the expertise to do the planning properly is just reach out to somebody who's done it before. What I found is, and I'm one of them, and I'm sure you're one of them, folks who have led successful cloud migrations are very willing to share their experience. Reach out, talk to the people who've actually done it. That's probably my best advice when on how to seek help for probably anything, but cloud migration certainly, is talk to somebody who's actually done it successfully and find out what is necessary and what is not necessary. And probably what they're going to tell you is a very similar thing. You really just need to, at some point, just get started on the things that are low risk, and lower the cost of failure for that and everything else. But there are some very simple best practices that you can follow, and it's been done hundreds of times at this point.
Earlier in this episode, we said the primary measure of success is a workload is running in the cloud and we decommissioned it in the data center. But is it that easy? Or do you recommend setting up some other KPIs, how the IT organization then can communicate to the rest of the organization, hey, it's worth the effort because you're taking away capacity from other initiatives, it's worth the money, and we are seeing progress? Or is it just, okay, 50 migrated, 150 migrated?
Yeah, so now this depends. In my situation, it was the goal of the migration was to exit the data center.
Okay.
Right. I think that I'm seeing that more and more from customers, and for them, they have a strong motivation to migrate, and so that problem doesn't really come up. For others who are still trying to kind of justify the migration to the organization, then it becomes demonstrating value. And like I said before, I don't like that this is the case, but it's usually cost, which is what convinces people. Put it this way, when you're making a case for the value of cloud, if the customer is not convinced that it's going to be cost effective, they're usually not interested in the other part, right? So it's kind of like a prerequisite. So I would say in that situation, migrate workloads, demonstrate, if you could do this, and this is actually a relatively easy thing to do in the cloud, but it looks impressive because it kind of is. Migrate a workload, demonstrate that it's running at a lower cost than it was on-prem, but running better. So this is a kind of a right-sizing exercise.
So you recommend that you have a benchmark. So this workload in the old on-premise data center, and then you compare it with the workload running in the cloud.
Yes. So what does your organization care about? So typically there's an application running on, this workload is an application, internal application, let's just say for sake of argument, and there's a pain point. Like every time I log into this whatever system, it takes 5 seconds before the screen appears. It's just these little paper cuts, right? This was an example from my migration. You will migrate that application. You will, and here's just a really strong pattern. You will double the resources, the specifications of everything that was on-prem. It sounds very scary because that's going to be expensive, but it's for a very short period of time. You do that and you observe all of the infrastructure metrics, so disk I/O, CPU, et cetera. And then you measure where they need to be. And based on those measurements, you right size. Now, in some things, like maybe it was I/O bound, so you increase the disk I/O setting, right? But then perhaps memory and CPU was just way over-spec'd. So you reduce the memory and CPU. What you end up with is a system that is net less expensive to run because it's using, if you count all of those resources, less, but the bottleneck is resolved. So then in that way, you could show this application is running less expensively in the cloud, yet you can see with your own eyes when you log into the application, it's snappier, it's faster. And that's how I would approach an organization like that that's not quite convinced. Now you tell the story, which you are great at telling, of modernization and all the benefits of doing that, because that's going to be the next phase, the real modernization, taking advantage of AI in the cloud and all of the other great tools that this in AWS. I've lost count of the number of services and features that we have, but it's a lot. So being able to take advantage of those to enhance your business capabilities, but you can see right off the bat, even with that just kind of minimal viable refactoring of that one application, that's both less expensive and better by those metrics.
At Amazon, we say you need data and anecdotes for every argument that you have if you want to make a decision. What I see with a lot of customers, they just have anecdotes.
Right.
And they're missing the data. And I with every customer I speak, I recommend they need to set up data infrastructure. They need to be able to benchmark their on-premise data center from an availability perspective, time to market perspective, performance perspective, quality perspective, so that you really can prove in your migration, your modernization, that cloud is beneficial for IT and the underlying business processes. But I very, very rarely see this.
Yeah. And it's a shame because in the cloud, it gives you the capability to measure so many things that maybe were more difficult to measure on-prem. Like cost is a big one, right? This is one kind of message that I like to talk to finance people when they, are evaluating the cloud is, or even to IT folks, is like, this will be the first time probably ever in your career that you could do 100% accurate cost allocations by business unit. Right? Because there's nowhere to hide in the cloud, right? Whereas in the data center, anyone who's done cost allocations of IT, it's always just a kind of a guess, and people argue. And if you add up all the costs that people are responsible for, it's never 100%. It's always a lot of shared services. So in the cloud, you could very easily, like with account boundaries or with tagging or a combination of both, you can very easily know precisely and defendable numbers of this application is costing this much to run. Now, that's a great metric. Like finance people love that. IT leaders love that too, because it makes the argument about cost allocation kind of much simpler, because it's like, these are your costs. If you want to reduce it, we can reduce it. Here's the ways to do it. These are the trade-offs. But it really simplifies that whole process, which historically has been very difficult. It's like a superpower for finance people, right? The other thing it does is it helps with the cost optimization phase, which, in my opinion, should be one of the first things that you do in the cloud, because there's so many opportunities to cost optimize. But to your point, you have metrics now. I could say by the minute, oftentimes, how much this is costing, and it show scenarios where if we were to change these things, then it would cost less. And so there's accountability on the costs, but there's also the metrics that are very like immediate feedback on what you're doing.
I wonder with your approach if you aren't just replicating your on-premise data center in the cloud. And from my perspective, this is an anti-pattern. When I talk to customers, I say, no, it's not just about migrating and replicating your data center in the cloud. But you say, okay, we just migrate so quickly so that we can modernize. But what about infrastructure as a code? For me, when I moved in the cloud and then we started to automate everything, and in my organization, a manual change in production was perceived as an incident, not priority 1 incident, but severity 3 incident. But so are you replicating data centers with your approach? And is it okay? And then why? Or what is the definition of done, so to say, in your approach for we migrated a workload?
Yeah, great question. So I think it's a bad idea to run a data center in the cloud, generally speaking. I'll also say that no matter how you approach your migration and modernization effort, no matter how much you decide to couple or decouple it, there is going to be migration work and there's going to be modernization work. The only question is, at what point do you do each, right? So if you take the traditional, what I'll call the traditional legacy approach, which I think is an anti-pattern, the slow approach, and you do the modernization while you're migrating, you are still migrating and modernizing. You're just doing two somewhat complex and probably new to you activities at the same time with limited resources, introducing complexity into both of them. Generally, what happens is the migration slows down and it becomes more expensive. And this is the thing that I would like to avoid and why I advocate for my approach. Now, it's a very common reaction to say, you're saying lift and shift, and I would say, well, it's not quite a lift and shift, it's a minimal viable refactor, but it's a very temporary state. So what I'm saying is just you do step one, you don't do step one and step two at the same time. You do step one, which is migrate very rapidly to the cloud. And yes, you'll have a data center in the cloud, a slightly better version of your data center in the cloud for a very brief moment in time. That moment should be as brief as possible. And if, in fact, you do start modernizing while other applications are migrating, you may never have that full data center in the cloud. So it's a very common, it's a very good question because it's a very common kind of concern with this approach. But the reality is that what ends up happening is you end up migrating much faster. You end up freeing yourself from the data center much faster, so you can free up those resources and perhaps repurpose them to the modernization effort. And then you can really focus just on the modernization. So you can increase the chances of migrating, and that should just be such a quick event that migration shouldn't even be something that's really talked about in 2025, in my opinion, right? It should be such a quick event that almost nobody notices. The modernization is where all the value happens and where all the real work happens. So just take that out of the migration so that there's less complexity in both of them. Do them separately, and you will get to modernizing quicker. So in other words, you will get to a modernized state in the cloud quicker by decoupling migration and modernization, if you can just wrap your head around the fact that maybe for some very brief moment in time, you'll have a replicated version of what you have in the data center in the cloud. But that should be very brief.
I really like the approach of the minimum viable refactoring. This is, from my perspective, a very, very powerful concept. Do you have a last recommendation, advice, thought that you want to share with the audience?
I would say be clear about your goals, right? If you're migrating to the cloud, do the migration. Don't overcomplicate it. Make it as simple as possible, but no simpler, right? And typically that's far simpler than how most people do it. Question every part of your migration plan and migration process, and have it pass a litmus test. Is this moving us forward towards that metric? Number of applications migrated, number of applications decommissioned in the data center. And if the answer is no, then consider getting rid of it, right? In fact, it's much easier to start from zero and just start adding in the things that are necessary than to start from where you're at and remove all the things that are unnecessary. But the point is just focus on those things that are really going to move the needle forward. Understand that moving fast can be done safely. In fact, I think it can be done more safely because you're removing complexity from the process. So don't move so fast that it's dangerous, although I've never seen anyone do that. They usually move so slow that it's dangerous. Get to the cloud as quickly as possible, and then the modernization actually becomes far less risky as well because you have all the power and capabilities of the cloud at your disposal. You also have an experienced team because they've just done a migration, and they'll be much more skilled in the modernization effort as well. So that's kind of my message, is keep the migration simple as possible. There's some planning that needs to take place, but far less. Once you get started, the plan will start to take shape, and the plan will be perfect by the time you're done. The migration should be as fast, as simple as possible, and then focus on the modernization, because that's the most fun part,
Yeah.
and that's where you're going to get the most value, and hopefully you're free from your data center at that point.
Yeah, I fully agree. Thank you very much for sharing your experience today with me and with the audience. And thank you very much for being with us today. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the AWS Migration Modernization Podcast.